Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Hello all, welcome back. Pumped to have you on board again after a little hiatus for another episode, and the first of many to follow on Greats with Garby. And we are back in a big way, literally 7 foot big, in fact, with one of Australian basketball's greatest ever. A 2-time Olympian, 3-time NBL champion, 2-time NBL MVP, superstar in European basketball, and only the 3rd Australian to play in the NBA after being taken with pick 18 in the 1997 draft by the Dallas Mavericks. He is Chris Anstey, and he's with me now. Chris, thanks so much for joining me. Great to see you. Great to hear from you.
Thanks for having me. I hope this is going to be a bit of fun.
It will be a bit of fun. So much to discuss. I mean, obviously your time in basketball here in Australia, the NBA we'll get into in great detail, your time in Europe, Boomers issues, etc., including your time as a junior tennis player playing doubles with Mark Philippoussis, which will be an interesting chat. But you're smiling at the moment. Your doggies, your beloved Western Bulldogs, through to the grand final. That's going to be exciting for you.
They are. It's been incredible. One of the greatest joys through lockdown has been all of the sport that's had the Tokyo Olympics. The AFLs continue to go. I don't mind my horse racing. So we've had something on at the very least, but the Bulldogs had an incredible regular season, and it just seemed like it might have gone a little bit too long. But, the weekend was incredible, beating Port Adelaide like we did. I said to you off air, it was one of those ones, as hopeful as I was, it certainly wasn't expected, and sort of just sat there and watched with my mouth open. I was up and down off the couch, and I was riding every possession. And it's funny when you barrack for a team. The night before, I watched Melbourne, and I knew they were home at quarter time. And then we're up 5 goals at quarter time, and it felt like there was so much time left. I never felt like we're home until early in the fourth quarter. So can't wait for the grand final. I fully expected, as much as I didn't want it to be, my AFL watching experience to be over on the weekend. But here we are with another grand final. It's, as a Bulldog supporter, it's incredible. We waited a long time for 2016, and we've got another one. It's amazing.
And it promises to be a beauty. We can't wait for it. By the time you're listening to this podcast, perhaps the grand final has been run and won, but there's plenty of other answers from Chris Anstey that will keep you more than interested, that is for sure. I'll start with a general one, Chris. There's big in life, and then there's 7 foot big. There's 7 foot tall. That's a whole nother scale altogether. What's it like being 7 foot tall?
It's normal. I mean, it's all I've ever known from the time I hit probably 17. This is how tall I've been. Growing up, like anyone who's different, I hated it. I got picked on, I got teased, I got bullied, all those sort of things. And, as a kid, all you want to do is fit in. And being so much taller than everyone else, you don't. And then adults expect you to behave more maturely, expecting that you're a bit older than what you are. And, my kids have been through that, or they're going through it as well. So it's something I'm very sympathetic to them over, because I've been through it. But, you just mentioned the Bulldogs. All we could get was, individual seats. Our whole family, we had 5 seats in all different sections for the 2016 grand final. And we're trying to trade them out, and all we kept getting was, we've only got standing room. Now, standing room for our family is incredible. We were down on the first level. We were standing behind the back row. We were right at the bar, and we had the best view in the house. There wasn't a head in front of us, even when the crowd got up. So there are certainly benefits, and in a sporting context, of course, there are benefits. But it's all I've ever known.
Yeah. And it's obviously served you very well throughout your career, which led to 2 Olympic Games, which must be incredible experiences. And we're just coming off the back of a Boomers bronze medal. Did you feel a part of that? I mean, everyone said, this is for the players who have come before us. Did you actually, in a tangible sense, feel like, there's a little bit of me in this achievement, in breaking this medal drought?
I didn't. I was wrapped for them. It's something that I was a part of 2 Olympic campaigns, and we tried very, very hard to achieve what the boys did. And in Sydney especially came really, really close. We finished 4th. And, of course, when you get to the semi-finals, there's only one team that walks away without a medal, and that was us. So one of the best basketball experiences of my life became one of the more disappointing in the same period of time. And that's always an interesting emotion. But I missed Athens with an injury, and in Beijing we went in really, really confident, and a real smack in the face of how important every game was. We lost to Croatia by 15 in the first game, a team we'd beaten twice in the lead up in the weeks before. And as much as we then went and we beat Russia, we beat Iran, and we beat Lithuania for the first time in Australian men's basketball history, and beat them by 30. One of the best games of basketball I've ever been a part of. We crossed over against the United States, and we hung with them up till halftime, but Kobe Bryant was too good in the third quarter, and we couldn't get that done. So, we finished Beijing in 7th place and missed out on paper by a long way. But we felt that we were close. Rio, of course, the last one after London, a bad call away from a medal, and it felt like that was our chance. But this one, it just felt different. It did. Matisse Thibel coming in, the newly held culture nights that the group has, where the team as a whole, and they bring the Opals in as well, and they explore where they've come from, where they're going, and a real focus on living in the present. And I know there was a lot of money tipped in by the NBA boys who are on the team, and they wanted to make sure they left no stone unturned. But this one, it felt almost like it was meant to happen, and maybe a little bit of luck involved as well, because, Slovenia in their semi-final had a shot to beat France, and a block shot right at the end of the game by Nicolas Batum won the game for France. And with Aaron Baines being out for us, I don't think the matchup would have been any good for us in the semi-final if it wasn't Slovenia. So at some level we got a little bit lucky, but of all my memorable Olympic basketball experiences, I'd have to say that sitting down on the couch with my 6-year-old son and letting him stay up late and putting him on my knee just before the game started and telling him some stories. And of course we'd spoken a bit during the Olympic Games, but really doing my best to help him understand that he could be about to watch something historical and something that I'd tried to do but couldn't get done. And we spoke about Paddy Mills, and we spoke about Joe Ingles, and I've told a number of people in the time since that I still remember sitting on my dad's knee when he woke me up in the middle of the night to watch Australia win the America's Cup for the first time. I knew nothing about yachting, I still don't, but I knew that I was watching history, and that's what I wanted my 6-year-old son to have the chance to do. And so by the time we'd won, and by the time all the text messages went around, and by the time I celebrated with him and we talked a bit more, I think it must have been the latest night he's ever had. He didn't go to bed until nearly midnight, and I'd do it every single time over again. And it was just an incredible moment for us as ex-players to celebrate what they'd done. But to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I didn't feel a part of it. I think that would be almost selfish to feel a part of it. I'm proud of the fact that I was a part of the path towards building that team, but that's them. That's that coaching group. That's that playing group. They deserve it. From everything I know about all of the boys in the group that I know, couldn't be a more deserving group. So rap for them.
A wonderful tribute. Well said. Ben Simmons wasn't a part of the group. You were quite outspoken against him for not choosing to be a part of the Boomers for this Olympic campaign. What is it about his decision that irked you a bit, in the way in which it was handled?
It's two ways. And we mentioned if he wanted to be a part of it, he would have been. I would have loved for it to have been a reset for Ben. Get away from the negativity that was Philadelphia and surround himself with a group of coaches and players who appreciate what he can do. I think the basketball public has focused a lot over the last year or two on what Ben's not great at. But he's great at so many things, and any team that Ben Simmons plays on in any league or any competition in the world becomes better. But I think Brian Goorjian said it best after the Olympics when they really drilled down on it. He said that he wanted Ben Simmons on the Boomers team not so much as to give them a better chance of winning a medal, which he would have, but to be ingrained in the culture so that if he chooses to be a part of it moving forward, it's ingrained. Because so much time and effort's gone into building such a positive, nurturing culture at that level, which is hard to do. And Paddy Mills and Joe Ingles have been incredible, as have Daly and Bainesy and those other guys. But we need people to carry it forward. And so the hope is that Matisse Thybulle, he's seen it now. Dante's seen it. Even Josh Green has seen it. Josh Giddey touched it. He didn't make the team, but if Ben Simmons comes in, of course, he's going to be a huge part of that basketball team. And it's important that the most influential players on court become also the most influential off it. And that was the hope for Ben. And my hope is the same, that he has a change of heart. He understands. I'll tell you what, if you're ever going to have a little bit of FOMO of missing out, it's got to have been watching that. And my hope is that he watched it and he listened to how much it meant. But no, look, it was disappointing that he didn't. From a professional point of view, I felt that he might regret missing an opportunity to really endear himself with the Australian basketball public, which has got a fractured relationship with him. But it still becomes his choice, and you don't want someone to be a part of a team that they don't want to be a part of. And again, we got the medal. It's only 3 years until Paris. The hope is that Paddy Mills is still there, that Joe Ingles finds a way to go around again, and Ben Simmons chooses to play and he's integrated into a team with those two guys, plus the guys who've seen it, so that he can carry it forward with some of the other great young players we've got.
Yeah, anyone watching on could see that's a positive environment. You can only be enhanced as a person and as a basketballer, right, by being a part of that Boomer setup. So hopefully Ben has a change of heart, because it just seems clear that it would be a massive plus for him moving forward personally and professionally. Let's take a little detour from basketball for the moment, Chris, and talk a bit of tennis, because reading up on you, a number 2 ranked Australian for 15-year-olds nationwide coming through in tennis, played doubles with Mark Philippoussis as well. Were you just good at tennis, or was it actually your focus way before basketball to make it to the very top? Were you drilled down on trying to get to the top?
Yeah, I love tennis. And I actually played against Mark. I would have only played a game or two of doubles with him at club level, but my doubles partner was Dustin Fletcher. He played
wow.
He was my doubles partner for as long as I can remember. And, we were really good as a doubles pair. And we were the best doubles partnership in Australia for 4 years in a row. But no, it was. My dream was to play Wimbledon. One of my more vivid memories right at the start of my basketball career was walking on the Rod Laver Arena, and there was a wooden floor on it. That's not what the dream was. The dream was to walk on the Rod Laver Arena. Back then it was a green, plexi cushion court. So it was weird. And for the first couple of years of my basketball career, it was almost a bit of a joke in my head that I was a bit of a fraud, and I was doing this for a little while. And myself and my tennis friends found it funny. We joked about it a bit, but no, I loved it. The team element, and we had as close a group of tennis friends as I could. But in the end, the tennis tournaments only came around during the school holidays, and there was competition on the weekends. But for basketball to be a real part of a team and to try something new, it became appealing. And I suppose, my height, as much as, I was able to be a little bit stronger than a lot of players when I was young, it started becoming as much of a hindrance when my serve came back a lot more, and, the real advent of those baseliners just getting everything back and being incredible from the baseline. It wasn't my strength. And as well as I moved for 7 foot, I didn't move at an elite level for a tennis player. So I think the writing was on the wall. The realization was there that as much as I loved tennis, I reckon I'd peaked. I reckon I'd reached my ceiling. And it became fascinating to see how far I could go in basketball.
Yeah, I mean, I was keen to ask about Mark Philippoussis, but Dustin Fletcher as a doubles partner, I mean, that's a real beanpole combination.
We were tough to get by at the net. We didn't get lobbed much. But, the thing is, it was interesting because we always loved playing doubles, and doubles was already almost a little bit of a second-rate part of tournaments like it is today then. And he had, Fletch had incredible hands, and because we spent so much time playing together, we just got it. We knew what we were doing. We knew what the other one was doing, and we're really, really hard to beat. We took a lot of pride in almost we'll never lose. We didn't lose a game for 4 years at one stage, and we won the biggest tournaments in the state and the country. And part of it, we still didn't make national teams or state teams. That always take the two best singles players and then play them together in the doubles. Where and we would have beaten the doubles combination they'd rolled out 8 times in a row, but couldn't make a team to play doubles. The Junior Davis Cup type events. So we kind of saw the writing on the wall there as well, where we just didn't think we'd ever make a representative team, and they were clearly going to pick singles players, and that was fine. But 10 players get picked in a basketball team and 22 get picked in an AFL team, so maybe our chances were better in our chosen sports.
I don't think you can regret a thing. Hey, what was the Scud like as a 15-year-old before we get back onto basketball? Because for my generation, he was the Nick Kyrgios for kids today. Like, we loved the Scud. I mean, he was everything you dreamed to be, very good with the women, but played with this carefree attitude and so much excitement. I mean, he was like a hero for teenagers like myself growing up. What was the Scud like to play alongside in those days as a 15-year-old?
Such a really good kid, and had a tough upbringing. I don't think it's any secret that his dad was demanding, and even at that age, you could tell. And you saw some things where you're like, oh, that's really tough on Mark. But it was interesting because, he was a really good junior, but certainly he wasn't head and shoulders above the rest of us. Some of the guys I grew up playing, we had Joe Sirianni, for example, a name that some tennis people would know, but probably fair to say he was better than Mark as a junior. And the commentary as Mark progressed and improved, and I'll never forget sitting in the Lakes Entrance Caravan Park watching Mark beat Pete Sampras in the Australian Open. I think it was round of 16, and then went and lost to Todd Woodbridge, I believe, in the next round, or Mark Woodford.
Mark Woodford it was, yep.
Mark Woodford in the next round. And that's what Mark was. He was inconsistent, but there was a lot of commentary around Mark underachieving and not living up to his potential. But if you knew Mark as a junior, we sit back and marvel at how well he did, because he didn't move great. He wasn't a fantastic athlete, and he found a way to be one of the best tennis players in the world on his day. So I think the other way, where it was amazing to see how well he did. It was amazing to see him develop. It was amazing to see him grow into his own person out of the shadow or the influence of his dad. And he did it rough, and I'm wrapped for all his successes. That's
really interesting, because so many people say the Scud, didn't achieve anywhere near his potential. You saw him as a teenager, and you've got a different perspective on it. That's really interesting. So at 17, you start saying tennis is not going to work out, and you move into basketball. And by the age of 19, you're in the Melbourne Tigers setup and developing as one of the guns in the Australian game. That's rapid. That's a rapid development. How did it happen so quick?
I didn't have any bad habits when I started. The Melbourne Tigers junior team that I walked into was just such a nurturing group. They're one of the best junior teams in the nation. They'd won national tournaments, and I got implanted into training sessions with some of the best kids of my age in the nation. So I got to learn from the best straight away, and I was so far out of my depth. But one thing I could do was I could run and I could catch. And our coach at the time, Des Middleton, and then it became Al Westover, who became the coach of the Melbourne Tigers later on in his career and in mine. They were just so much more interested in development instead of win at all costs, which we see a lot in junior sport. And the amount of time that they both invested into me and everyone else, winning took care of itself. But I suppose when I watched other people, and even as we sat and we watched the NBL team train after us, there was nothing that they did that you thought I don't reckon with hours and hours of practice I'll never be able to do that. And so that's exactly what I did. That literally the old Albert Park Stadium, every single day I would go down. I'd spend hours and hours and hours shooting and working on hook shots, and Al Westover had come down and rebound, or even Ray Tomlinson had come down, and the different people around Basketball Victoria were just always available. It was incredible. And as long as they were able to help, or even if they weren't, I knew how far behind I was, and at some level I knew that nobody was doing what I was doing. Nobody else was training for 4, 5, 6 hours a day. But I needed to, because I felt like I was so far behind. But because I moved okay, and again, because I had no bad habits, when it started clicking, it did happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it clicks in a massive way, because in 1997, you were drafted by the Dallas Mavericks, pick 18 overall. A few gun players go ahead of you: Tim Duncan, Chauncey Billups, and Tracy McGrady. I've looked through it though, Chris. There aren't too many guns after you. That's always a good thing, isn't it? When you look through the list and you went, all right, there's no one that can be an embarrassment for me that came after the Dallas first round pick.
Yeah.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
No, look, it was a whirlwind, and in the interim, of course, I got to meet and then play for Brian Gorgon and the Southeast Melbourne Magic, and lift weights with Brucey Gray, who's the best strength and conditioning guy I've ever known. And that was what got me there. I couldn't, as skilled as I was or I was becoming, I'll never forget the day when I caught the ball in the block against Mark Bradke, and my skills were developing a bit. And he was a little bit grumpy, just put his forearm in my back and marched me off the court and into the first row of the seats. And I thought, I can be as skilled as I want. If he can do that to me, it doesn't matter how skilled I am, I'm not going to be able to play. So I invested really, really heavily into my strength and conditioning, and that was clearly very helpful. But getting to the NBA, it was a different level. It was that again, but with size and athleticism and ability, and people had been playing the game since they could walk. It was very foreign for me, and I hadn't grown up watching the game, so it was a blessing in some way, because I wasn't daunted or intimidated by too many people, because in actual fact, I didn't actually know who they were.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my instincts and probably my creativity wasn't at the level that others who'd played the game since they were kids had. So, it was a great experience. I mean, it's not many Australians at the time had played in the NBA, and I'm very proud of my 26-point game against Boston and being able to start dozens of games and having some really successful months. Not quite good enough to earn that second contract, but good enough to, in my mind, for a 17-year-old tennis player to play a few years in the NBA worked out pretty well. Yeah,
and looking through your stats, I think you don't get enough credit for your time in the NBA, even though you only lasted 3 years. But take us through the draft experience, because 97, the internet's just kicked in, but it's not really a part of the way we function. Obviously, social media's decades away. So how did it come to be that the Dallas Mavericks are interested in you? When did you first get word of it? And then talk us through the draft day experience, going over there, being picked. Did you know Dallas were into you? Just take us through all of those steps.
So the first I knew they were interested in me, back when I was with the Magic, we used to do exhibition game tours and we'd play colleges. And mostly the young Magic guys would go, we'd pick up a few of our development guys, and, we'd play 6 or 7 games. We'd get in a minivan. They were fun trips. They were so much fun. We played some big schools. We played some average schools. And again, my collegiate basketball history was non-existent, or knowledge was non-existent. And, there was a game that I played that, one trip we played Texas and we played Arizona. And, I had a good game, and I knew there were a lot of people there, but I didn't know how big a school Arizona was and the reputation it had. And I had 30-odd points and 15-odd rebounds. And apparently, who the hell's this kid? And, Arizona were one of the best schools in the nation. And we did the same in Texas. But our team had been together. So I guess people saw me play on those tours, and it wasn't until January of the year I got drafted where Brian Gorgian called me into his office and he said, you're gonna have to get an agent. I'm sick of taking all these phone calls from NBA scouts. And I had no idea that it was real, and so I did. And he sheltered me from it for the rest of that season. But I spoke to the Mavericks on the phone. I spoke to other clubs on the phone. It became real. And as for draft day, I didn't go. We were in the middle of an NBL season. We played the Sydney Kings on the Saturday before, and the draft, I think, was on the Friday morning. So I'll never forget the feeling of relief when we played the Kings and it was done, because as interesting and as exciting as the experience was, it was really awkward feeling like somebody was watching absolutely everything you did. And I just felt this sense of pressure and wanting to sit the right way on the bench and make sure I gave high fives all the time. It was weird.
Wow.
But so that the second that game finished, I knew in my heart they've got everything they're going to have. I can just take a breath now. And so on draft day, it was, I still think it was, I probably got this wrong. I think it might have been Steve Quartermain, but he'd organised the green room or one of the rooms at the TV station in South Melbourne for myself, my team, and some of my close family, or my family and some of my close friends to watch the draft. They'd have it streamed in because it wasn't streamed here. So we did weights in the morning. I put on a pair of jeans and the club polo shirt. We had lunch and we went on into the TV studios and we watched. And all I knew going in was that the Chicago Bulls were going to draft me with the last pick in the first round if I was available. So having said that, until it happened, I was never sure. But going at 18 was a surprise. I knew that I actually got selected by Portland, who had on the same day had traded me to Dallas within a minute or two of drafting. They'd organised that. That made more sense in my head because I hadn't spoken a word to Portland. But, you put the obligatory cap on and you put the singlet on, you do a few media interviews, and then we went to training. And it was the most fun, relaxed, because part of the emotion that I felt was a little bit of embarrassment and a little bit of guilt because, I got guys sitting next to me like Sam McKinnon and Jason Smith who were still better players than me, and I knew what that would have meant to them, but it was me getting drafted, and it was a really interesting, emotional day. But as soon as we got on the practice court and all the jokes about not being able to touch me or go near me because I'm worth millions, all done in the right way, but it was just fun and it was light and it was one of the most fun sessions we've had. We went out and we played Sydney again that weekend at home, just with one of those quirks in the draw. We beat them by 35, and it was just free and it was loose and it was incredible. So, I finished the season. I didn't actually get to Dallas. I never set foot in Dallas until I got there. Actually, I went for the summer league and did all my contract and all that kind of thing, and straight back, finished the NBL season, had the under-23 World Championships, and, got there in time for preseason camp. But certainly not what it is today, flying over, being there for the draft, all being streamed, having a social media account. Everybody knows who you are around the world before you get drafted. But very, very different back then.
It was still a big deal for us in Australia, enormously so. I mean, Longley was there. Gaze had played like 7 games, I think. You were the third ever. So it was massive. And you were a youngster. You came out of Australia. I mean, Longley had been in college already. So you were the NBL product, which I think was hugely exciting for Australian basketball fans. So with that in mind, what was it like when you finally get over there and you haven't played in an American basketball system at all, and then you're thrown into, as some would say, the big bad world of NBA basketball where there's egos and excess and all of those things? What were your first impressions?
That, about how excessive it was, and I'd come from a culture that was incredible, and you get thrown into a locker room where no one really gives a shit about anyone else. They're all about their own improvement, especially in a team that's not very good, where you're battling for roles and battling for opportunities, and really you're battling for a bigger contract. And that was a really stark contrast to what I was used to. and really start to what most of us know Australian sporting culture to be, that real mateship, in the locker room that wasn't nearly as apparent over there as what it was at home. But as much as anything, it was just literally the size and the athleticism and the skill. It was just everything was a level up. And I was really, really conscious that I had to improve really, really quickly, because where I was when I got drafted wasn't an NBA player. I needed to improve. I needed to teach myself how to shoot. I needed to move better. I needed to get stronger again, and just needed to put in hours and hours more than everyone else was again. And it was hard, but it's at the same time, like I said, memorable. There were times when I was going so bad that Don Nelson, who was the coach of the Mavericks at the time, he tapped me on the shoulder and, all right, what injury do you want for a couple of weeks? We're putting you on injury reserve. And, there's nothing probably more embarrassing you get to a road game. I'll never forget it, the San Antonio. We played a game in San Antonio. I was on injured reserve, but I was fit as anything. For those basketball people listening, you do 10 in a minute sprints, so you're up and back, and you've got to get 10 done in a minute. You normally get it done in mid 50 seconds, but when you got to do 10 of them in a row with only a minute in between, and you've got all the corporates coming down the courtside seats, they're all drinking their beers, they're all eating their hot dogs, and here's you busting your ass and almost to exhaustion on the sideline right in front of them, and they're just giving it to you. You're not good enough to play. Come on, rookie. All this sort of stuff. It's tricky. So there's a lot of that type of thing goes on as well. But I wouldn't change it for the world. I learned plenty about the NBA. I learned plenty about myself. Had a lot of great times in there, and at the end of the day, I made enough money to set my ex-wife up and the kids. But no, great memories.
I'm sure. And your stats, like first season in the NBA, in a team that's battling, you average 16 minutes, and in those 16 minutes, you average 6 points and 4 rebounds. That's not bad at all in 16 minutes of basketball in a team that's really battling. So you showed a fair bit early on. Yeah,
I had my moments. I had good and bad. I was inconsistent. My best month was later on. My numbers didn't look anywhere near that until we got to probably February, March. And I had a block of time where, we got to a stage when clearly we couldn't make playoffs, and the team went into, okay, what are we looking at for next year? And let's get some minutes into the young guys. And, I started for a month. I averaged 30-something minutes a game and had a handful of, 18, 20-point games. And one of them was against the Celtics, had 26. And it was great. It happened to be St. Patrick's Day, which was my mum's birthday, and she was also there. And, of course, playing the Celtics on St. Patrick's Day, there was just something about it.
Fantastic.
And it was one of those games where everything clicked and came together. And I think that was probably the first time where I really felt like, all right, I can do this. The work I've done, and I felt like I belonged, or I was beginning to belong. There wasn't much of the season left by then. So, even leading into the off-season or leading into the preseason and towards the end of the preseason, my second year, I was playing great. And by way of matchups, one of the early games, coach decided to start Sean Bradley, 7'6" center on our team, for a matchup reason. He hadn't started all preseason. I was going to start, and started Sean game one, and Sean played off his brain, and I got buried behind that, and Sean held on to that spot, and I missed the boat. A little bit of misfortune, a little bit of, I'm sure, my own fault, but just didn't quite get there.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Sean Bradley. 7'6". Growing up, we all remember him being drafted pick 2. What was the relationship like between two really tall white guys on the same team?
Yeah, I'm not used to being around people who are 6 inches taller than me. He was great. Sean's a wonderful human being. Was always great to my family, was always great to me. He was another one of those guys that probably, fair to say, Sean didn't work as hard as a lot of the other players. And, would have always been fascinated if he had that same sort of work rate and invested in his body a bit more, as to what he could have been anything. But really sadly, recently Sean's been paralysed, had an accident, and I know he's not doing fantastic. And, more than anything, he was just welcoming. He was wonderful to us, and I hope he's doing all right.
Yeah, that's sad to hear. The second year, a guy called Steve Nash comes into the squad after being traded across to Dallas, and you draft a player by the name of Dirk Nowitzki, two legends of world basketball forever and a day. I mean, could you spot something special in Dirk straight away when he arrives as a raw kid? And what impact does Steve Nash have on a basketball group?
Yeah, look, we lived in the same apartment building, and that was also the year that we had the player strike, the lockout. So we spent a lot of time training together. Steve, I've never known someone, I know this term gets thrown around, I've never been around someone who works harder than Steve. To this day, one of Steve's favourite sayings or famous sayings is, if everyone worked as hard as me, I'd be out of a job. And he was just relentless. And I could tell you story after story about him getting caught doing more, but people forget that in the first month or two of Steve as a Dallas Maverick, not many people liked the trade to get Steve in, and he was booed by our home fans every time he advanced the ball down the floor. He was that ostracized within the group. They just didn't think he was any good. He never asked for a trade. He never stopped working. And to look back and hear that home fans would have booed Steve Nash just seems incredulous now. But that's where Steve came from. Dirk, on the other hand, as well, he didn't play much, and he was in Nelly's bad books a lot in his first year, and again, a lot of criticism for drafting Dirk over Paul Pierce. But the one thing with Dirk is that I've never seen somebody shoot the ball with less effort. It was just so perfect to watch, and no matter where he was on the floor, and he needed to develop his body and he needed to get stronger, and he had his shooting coach with him, and he used to shoot all these off-balance shots, and there's method to the madness, and we've spoken about it a lot since, but as soon as he got his NBA feet under him and could deal with the physicality, I remember calling Brian Gorgon and a couple of months in saying, you want to see this kid we drafted? It's just effortless. And I actually said to him, he's going to be the best European to play in the NBA. And he thought I'd lost my mind. At the time was Tony Kukoc, we had Drazen Petrovic, we had Vlade Divac. And I said, you don't understand. It's different. And he called me years later and goes, you remember saying that? I said, yeah, I do. He said, I think you're right. And look, and I've said it before, but I could tell you a bunch of stories about Dirk, but some of the things Dirk's done off the court, even for my daughter and in the years since, he's just an incredible human being as well. And as much as I remember the things he did on the basketball court, and as much as I followed him when I left, and he was the guy that, him and Steve were the guys that I followed. When I left, I was closest to them and was wrapped for both of their successes. But they're just too, if you didn't know basketball and you walked into a dive bar they'd have a beer with you, they'd talk, and you wouldn't know who they were.
Well,
which I think is just absolute testament to them.
I've done exactly that with Steve Nash. 2010 Football World Cup in South Africa. We're at a bar in Johannesburg, and Steve Nash is there in his Brazilian tracksuit top. Everyone's like, it's Steve Nash. And everyone's just going up to him and talking to him. And what are you doing here? He's like, man, I just love my football. I'm following Brazil around the World Cup. And he sat with us having beers, and he could have been anyone in the world. And, people just treated him that way because he acted that way. And it was just the most pleasant experience, seemingly for him, but obviously for us as well.
I'm really glad you've told me that. And I have had other people say similar things, but he's a man of the people. He's, like I say, he's an extraordinary human being.
So you go to the Bulls the season after your second season in Dallas. Tony Kukoc is still there. I think BJ Armstrong's gone back, but they were a world away from the Chicago Bulls that had dominated world sport a few years previous. You have a 17-65 season, bottom of the conference. How difficult was it being at a club that had been so dominant and was now in that position?
It wasn't too different for me. I'd come from Dallas. But you still had the sense when you walked in, you saw the championship trophies, you had the banners, you played at the United Center. The traditions carried on. And, Randy Brown, Dickie Simpkins, Will Perdue, these guys. We drafted Elton Brand and Ron Artest, and they were two, especially Ron, clearly very polarizing characters. But No, look, it is a hard situation when, very similar to what it was in Dallas, where all of a sudden there was a clean slate and people were jockeying for increased roles, increased pays. There was no alpha dog there anymore. Tony Kukoc was the best player on the team, but he was as much a facilitator as anything. And his demeanour, his mindset wasn't to score 25 a game. It was to get everyone involved. So, yeah, again, a really great group of people and one that I enjoyed being around. And there was something surreal about pulling on a Chicago Bulls uniform and representing the club. But yeah, we're on track for a long time to be one of the worst or the worst team in NBA history according to record, and that was tough. But the one thing about the Chicago fans I'll never forget is that they always appreciated and understood how fortunate they'd been. And as much as they didn't want to blow up the team, they realised that they'd had maybe the best team in all of sports, in the history of all sports.
Yeah.
And they supported us. We were getting 15,000 of preseason games. They knew we weren't any good, but they came and they turned up and they supported us. And, for a team that was that bad, that was incredible.
That's great. You're obviously following on in the footsteps of another Aussie centre there, Luke Longley. Did they put that pressure on you? Did you feel that pressure to follow in Luke's footsteps? How was that narrative playing out when you were there?
It didn't. It was almost non-existent. Outside the fact that Luke, by who he is, allowed every single person within that organisation and in that city to love me because I was from the same place as him. And if I got painted with a similar brush to what Luke was, then I was going to be the most popular person there. So I'm very grateful to Luke for that. But look, you just couldn't find, and you sit down, and I always found myself, I was always close with support staff, equipment managers, trainers, and some of the stories, that was a great part of the Bulls, is you get the actual stories, but you just get stories about, and you just hear it, how great a person Luke is and how generous he is. And I'd experienced that myself, but it was everyone. I almost challenge I challenge people to find a person that says anything negative about Luke.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and more than expected, especially if you watch the Australian Story with him that was done recently, which was a wonderful documentary. I implore you to watch it if you haven't yet on the ABC. You came back after the Bulls. Well, let's talk about leaving the Bulls. So when they tell you they're not going to give you another contract and you don't have another NBA contract, how devastating was that? And were you really cut? Did you want to come back to Australia? What was your position like at that stage?
No, I wanted to stay in the NBA, but I wanted to play in the Sydney Olympics. And it wasn't cutting off my nose to spite my face. It was, if I had to performed well enough, I would have earned another contract. And, over the years, I came really, really close a couple of times, but didn't quite get it done. But no, look, when I knew that it wasn't going to happen, the only club I wanted to play for was rebranded to the Victoria Titans, but I wanted to play for Gorge and I wanted familiarity. I wanted to get better again. And I knew out of anywhere I would get better in that environment. So I played there for 2 years. I made next to no money, and Gorge was almost embarrassed when I called him and said, "Can I come back?" He said, "What?" He said, "I've got no money." I said, "I made it the last 3 years. I don't care." And the NBL actually forced the club to pay me more money because they didn't think it was fair that I would play for that little for them and no one else, which flew in the face of salary cap issues and that kind of thing. But no, it was a really interesting year, really, really successful regular seasons. But, I got injured in one of the semis and then missed. Jason Smith got injured. Tony Robinson got injured. All in finals. So we lost in the semi-final 2 years in a row. So it was, probably all in all, they were empty years looking at it from that perspective, because we really felt we were the best team in the NBL, but we just didn't get it done. And then the Victoria Titans folded. So it was really, really quick. And disappointing ways to end both those years, as great as it was living back in Melbourne and being a part of the club.
And really tough times for Australian basketball. I mean, the NBL hit a really low point, and obviously we've seen it revamp now, and it's up and going again, which is great. So in that period, you go to play over in Russia Ural Great Perm, and then Kazan. I actually spent 3 weeks in Kazan, 2018 World Cup. The Socceroos were based there. Awesome city. I mean, you hear Kazan, Russia, and you think, oh, it's cold and, there isn't much to it, but it was a lot of fun being there. So I can imagine you would have enjoyed living there. But, it's interesting in Australian basketball. You guys are in the NBA, and we know every single thing that you're doing. Obviously, in the NBL, we can watch you really closely. But you're in Russia. You won titles. You won massive awards. I just feel like with Australian basketballers over in Europe, we just don't hear or see too much about it unless you're really part of that tight basketball clique. Did you feel lonely? Did you feel like people had forgotten about you when you're over there playing in Russia and you're doing great things and no one's really taking notice of it?
Yeah. I was really proud of my years in Russia. And my first year in Perm was the opposite to what you described in Kazan. It was brutal. It was industrial Russia. It was minus 45 degrees, and 2 months in, I thought I'd made the worst decision of my life. I had offers to go to Croatia and Spain and those sort of places, but I never would have guessed in a million years I would have stayed in Russia for 3 years. But you're right, Kazan was a lot more bearable. Middle of winter, it's still minus 30, minus 40 degrees. It wasn't quite the World Cup weather that you experienced, but the climate was brutal. But it was, part of it, one of my most I won a most valuable player award in my first year at Ural Great in a European competition for the whole league. And was one of those ones I won it, and a couple of people from home went, "Hey, did you win?" I'm like, "Yeah," and it was good. And they didn't really associate the level of the league, I don't think, but it was one of the biggest awards I've ever won.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
And in my second year in Kazan, we won a European championship, which represented the first European championship that Russia had won in any sport since it was accepted into the European Union. And that was a massive day in Russia. It was a massive day in Kazan. They had holidays, they had parades. They put on all kinds of celebratory events for us. We were literally treated like kings. But then, as you say, the distance became. You'd go back to I'd go back to my 2-bedroom apartment. I'd sit there, and there was no internet, there was no social media. I'd have my box set of DVDs, and I'd press play. And that was what it was. And it was one of the driving factors to coming home, was I wanted to share what I did well with my family and friends. I didn't want to finish my career and nobody know about it. And even, my parents go, "Yeah, it would have been nice to see Chris play." And they came over and they visited. And mum and dad were there when we won the European Championship, and they had a sense for it. But I think with anything, if you do something well, you want to share it with people. And that was outside of, that and my daughter. I just wanted my daughter to be around other kids who spoke English and to have a summer. As soon as she came home and we'd enrolled her in kindergarten for the whole year, and we put her in for a week before the holidays, and the difference in her in 1 week, I'm like, all right. I called Al Westover, who just become coach of the tie. All right, let's do this. I wanted to share what I did in front of my family and friends. I wanted my daughter to be in Melbourne. The only thing I did, the only, I guess, trivial thing that I wanted as part of my contract, I said, I don't think anyone had done it, but we have the corporate boxes that sit alongside of the court. I said, I'm not asking you to give me one, but if there's ever one available, and I knew they hadn't sold out and they don't sell out every week, I want the opportunity to buy it at cost price. And that way you're not losing money.
Yeah.
I'm not spending a fortune. I get to put my family and close friends right on the court. I can interact with them during the game. They can have a few drinks. We can go out afterwards, and I can get that real enjoyment from playing basketball again and share what I'm doing with them. And that's exactly what we did. And those years at the Melbourne Tigers were not only some of the most successful I've been a part of, but geez, they were fun. Just reconnecting with family and friends, sharing what I did. And it was great times.
I can imagine so. I mean, to be honest, Chris, you took the piss. 2 championships, 2 MVPs, 2 finals MVPs. You led the league in blocks for 4 years in a row, rebounding for 2. Did you feel as dominant as those stats suggest for those few years?
I knew I was good, and I knew I was different, and I knew that my time in the NBA and then really, really toughening up in Russia, I knew what I was capable of, and I knew there were others who weren't prepared to do what I'd done and was still doing. But I was confident. More than anything, I was confident in my teammates. I've always been an advocate that you want everyone's there because they do something great, and there was a sense of they hadn't really had that opportunity because their teammates over the years before had been so talented and so dominant. Gaze, Copeland, Bradkey, there wasn't much more to go around with the way that Lindsay Gaze rotated his team, and I wanted to be a part of something different. And the years Dave Thomas had and Steve Hoare had and David Stiff was incredible, but as much as anything, Darryl McDonald, I came back and Elle said, we're going to be starting DMAC. I said, isn't he 40? And I spoke to DMAC on the phone, and as soon as I spoke to him, like, he's ready to go. And the things he was able to do and the IQ of DMAC and the way he saw the floor, I'd like to think we made each other's lives easy, and by extension, we allowed everyone else's games to be a little bit easier because we're able to create space. That they were great teams. So to answer your question, no, but my team allowed me to be that player, and they entrusted me to be that player when it mattered. But no, it's probably more, I suppose, looking back now that it's been done for 15 years or so, I was playing well.
When you're the main man in the league, pretty much, when you're the number one name in Australian basketball in the NBL, your team's star player, did you battle it all with trying to maintain that and trying to be the spokesperson for your team? And at that stage, probably just about the spokesperson for the league, a league that's still battling a little bit in that NBL lull period. How did you deal with all of that?
I felt I hate losing. I don't like losing, and I can't stand non-competitive efforts. And that was what we became as a team. And it's funny, there's a moment we played Perth in a semi-final in game 1 in Perth. We'd been up all game, they fought back, and Perth are tough. They always have been. And Rashad Tucker got fouled with almost no time on the clock, and he had 2 free throws to win it for us, and he missed both free throws. And we went into overtime having just missed 2 free throws, and the vibe of the team was, all right, so it's overtime, let's go. There literally wasn't a second spoken about that moment. All that matters was what's next, not what's already happened. And that was our group. So to answer your question about maintaining that, we were just that was how we felt. As for being a spokesperson, I never considered myself that. I always just said what I thought. I never wanted to be someone who sat on the fence. I had to be that a little bit more later on when I coached, but I got a bit of flack as being disrespectful. I think we were playing Canberra one time, and they asked about Canberra's players, and we needed to win to make. Said, look, let's be honest. If we can't beat Canberra, we don't deserve to win a championship. This is a game we just should win. We need to win. We're a better team. And maybe it came across as being disrespectful, but that's how we felt. And I certainly didn't mean it as disrespectful. I meant it as the confidence that we carried as our group. And so spokesperson, maybe, but for me, I was just trying to, and I was really conscious of not just throwing the party line and saying something just to not create controversy. I wanted to actually have a bit of a voice, and if that's what it was, then great. But as you said, the league was struggling. Our home fans are incredible. Playing at the Cage, I mean, we sold out nearly every game, and the vibe in that place, ask opposition teams who came in, it was loud. And the fans who came meant it. that was a lot of fun. It certainly didn't feel like the league was going into a lull playing in that stadium.
Yeah, Perth fans would say the exact same thing. And now, thankfully, there's more of an equilibrium across the league, and Aussie basketball is doing well as a result, which is great. 2010, you retired, Chris, and we hear so much about sports people and the struggle with retirement and the loss of identity. How was it for you? How difficult was it?
I was a little bit different because I didn't grow up with the sport, and even there were times through my career I thought about retiring.
Right.
And I guess I was fortunate that because I hadn't grown up with it, it wasn't my everything.
Yeah.
And I was of the mindset that I was, and it was funny. I always thought it, but I'd never really verbalized it. But the one of the sports psychs who worked in our team said it best, and he said, "You're a human being who happens to be good at basketball. You're not a basketball player. Don't let what you're good at define you." And that was perfect for me. I never wanted it to define me. So yeah, it was still hard because I was going to have to do something completely different. The tricky part is people still speak to you as a basketball player and don't really have much interest in anything else that you're doing or opinions that you have outside of that basketball sphere. So, a little bit tricky, and it took a bit of time. I suppose the other thing is when you're in a basketball environment, I hope this doesn't sound wrong, but people who come to the games and come to the functions tend, not literally, but to speak up to you because they're there to watch you. And you're almost, as an athlete, put on a pedestal, and all you want to do is you crave to be just with everyone, like Steve Nash.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved, finding situations like that. I found it awkward when you couldn't be that. It was hard to just fit into normal, especially standing out at 7 foot tall, because it wasn't hard to put two and two together and figure out that I did stand out and who I was. And it became a little bit annoying, but yeah, just finding that next passion and next love took a little bit of time, but I think I was fortunate that I'd been financially pretty successful and I didn't need to go and get the first job that came about. I was able to take my time and work towards something that I really enjoyed without that financial strain.
Yeah, I mean, that's a luxury, of course. As I'm sure it would be watching your daughter play in college in the USA. Izzy Anstey, 6'4". She's at UCLA. I mean, what an incredible place to go to school. And she's making her way through the game at that level. How much joy and pride do you derive from that, Chris?
More than anything. As I do with my sons as well, with anything that they do. Izzy's walking her own path. She's, I get it that she's my daughter. I get it. We share the same surname, but I've never wanted her to be just attached to me. And I say that in a positive way, I hope, but she's a tough kid. She's got to figure it out for herself, and she's had her ups and downs. She's had injuries where she's missed Australian teams. Then she went and made Australian teams. She's the most exciting part for me with her going to college was, first of all, she gets this incredible life experience. She gets a new group of friends. She gets an education, and I've been around women's sport now for a long time, and I'm invested, but they still don't have the resources men do. So the education for any female athlete is so crucial, and she gets that at UCLA. And then she gets the basketball on top of that. I can't wait to see the person she becomes. I can't wait to hear about the experiences. I love the phone calls. She's up in Northern California visiting friends at the moment, and we're locked down. I keep telling her, if you're homesick, that you're not missing out on anything back here. But very proud of her, very eager to see her path, to see what she chooses to do. But just to hear about the stories and hear about her life. And I did the same thing. I moved away from home and I moved overseas, and I grew up, and she's going to grow up. Really, really proud of it. Watching it as a dad, as I'm sure any sports parent will tell you, is a different thing. I can't always bring myself to watch a game as a coach because I do focus more on what she's doing all the time. It's just, it's good fun.
That's great. We look forward to watching her progress with a lot of interest, the next generation, that is for sure. Now, a few quick questions to finish, Chris. Love throwing these in at the end. So, firstly, the best player you ever played with, and I'll give you two categories, NBL and then NBA as well.
Darryl McDonald in the NBL, and I had him at the Titans as well as the Tigers, with a very, very honourable mention to Sam McKinnon, who I got right at the start. And the other, flip a coin, Dirk or Steve, they had to be. Steve became that hardest working guy. And the irony is they weren't the greatest when I played with them. I'd probably actually say the greatest I played with in that moment was Michael Finley. He was incredible. He's one of the most underrated NBA guys that I ever saw. He just didn't get nearly enough credit for how unbelievable he was, but clearly it was Dirk and Steve that became the greatest.
Best you ever played against in both categories?
I played against Michael Jordan, so how do you put anyone higher than him? I played against LeBron, but probably as someone that I actually had to match up on, Shaquille O'Neal was just another thing. It was like running into a steel pylon and expecting it to move. He was just so big, so strong, so athletic at the start of his career, and it was the closest thing I've known to physically dominant. It just seemed impossible.
In the NBL, best you played against?
Mark Bradkey.
Yeah.
For me, he was the measuring stick, and of course with John Dorge. I feel bad not saying Dorgy and Tony Rollinson and those guys because they were my teammates. And the year I was at the Tigers, I played a minute a game, so I didn't play against them. So taking out my own team, yeah, it had to be Mark Bradkey. He was the guy that would beat me up, and he was the guy, even as I went through my career, I knew that if I could start feeling like I belonged on a court that he was on, I was going really, really well. And I started thinking that towards the end of my time, the first time round at the NBL, in the NBL.
I've got to get back to Shaq. So what's it like when the young beanpole Aussie rolls up alongside Shaquille O'Neal in the paint? Does he address you? Does he trash talk you? Does he take notice of you? What's going on there?
All of the above. But he's actually one of the nicest guys and funniest guys you could meet, and knew my name. And even when he came to Australia, there's a lot of people will tell you the old Melbourne Tigers training facility would organise scrimmages and closed gym scrimmages that he'd participate in and loved it, and we'd have functions and he'd call you over and he'd call your mates over. But, the first time I guarded him, he, backed me down and it was like a Mack truck backing into my chest, and as he spun, clipped me across my cheek, and I've still got the scar under my eye. And as I fell and, looking through blood because he'd cut my cheek wide open, I got this very memorable instant in time where, if the Shaq, the Reebok logo with Shaq holding onto the rim with his knees around his throat, I saw that from the ground. And I took solace in the fact that I heard the referee's whistle at the same time, and I thought all the cliches, at least I've put my body on the line for my team and I've taken a charge and all. I turned my head around from the ground and I looked at the referee and he's calling a block, and I'm like, he's just put me on my ass. He's cut me open. He's dunked on me. I've gone into the locker room to get staples in my face, and he's on his way to having 30 and 20 probably. But that's how it felt every time you had to go. You just prayed for a double team.
Absolutely brilliant. Maybe not your proudest moment on the court, but a nice story to end, and I think everyone can assess that the career is more than something to be proud of. One of the greatest Australian basketball has ever produced, Chris. So we just thank you so much for sharing it with us. It's an awesome tale with so many twists and turns, and I was enthralled. I'm sure many other people were. So thank you so much, and good luck with whatever the future holds. But it's certainly a career that Australian sport will cherish.
Yeah, mate, thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's always good to sit down, have coffee and have a chat. We're locked down, so I've got all kinds of time. But again, thanks for having me.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Chris.
No, anytime. But genuinely, thanks for having me.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.